You guys know I'm not like much of a motivational, rah kind of personality, but I want to ask you something. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not highly super inspirational. I'm saying I'm not high energy motivational. How many of you guys came to church, and I think sometimes we don't think of it, and so it's good to just be reminded. How many of you guys came to church expecting something? And when I say expecting, sometimes I think we just go through the motions, and I think we've all been guilty of it, where we sit in the service, we know there's going to be songs, we know there's going to be offering, we know there's going to be sermon, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something you can take home with you. And have you ever heard a sermon that to this day, all these years later, you still think back and you remember that sermon actually, or you read something in the Word, or you heard a song, or you had a moment with God? I think sometimes we forget the anticipation of like, wait a minute, those moments, if we get a few of those in our lifetime, they shape who we become by the time it's over. And actually, those kinds of moments are what shape the legacy of our families. Those are the kinds of moments that what I hope is that you're not sitting here going, okay, I'm in church. I would hope there's an anticipation that says, I believe this, because here's the thing. I've already put a lot of time. Let me make sure I sound this right, because I don't want it to sound like I'm a teacher. I prepare a lot for these lessons. That's not what I'm saying. I know there's some cool things that God's got, but they could bounce right off the top of our hard heads if we're not looking for them. So I don't even want to waste your time or my time unless we can agree, like, wait a minute, cool things could happen this morning in the weird little hangover between Christmas and New Year's where we're all living with regret and chaos and food and elastic waistbands. Even, I'm going to circle back to that actually, that today, I would hope that before you walk back out of this building, you've got something, a plaque that you can place in your soul somewhere that says, I won't forget today. I won't forget the shape that my heart was in when I left church this morning. Let me pray. Lord, the only way this works is if we are expecting it, if we're ready for it. God, give us a sense of anticipation that you are a miraculous God. Don't let our knowledge and our wisdom and our understanding overcompensate, Lord, to the point that we forget that you do miraculous and supernatural also. God, it seems like those moments sometimes come out of left field, but they change our lives, and we need them, and we depend on them. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen. I will tell you, I think the most powerful thing that goes on here is changed lives. I've heard somebody say the most powerful thing you'll ever experience or witness or be a part of is someone changing their mind, because it's so rare and it's so difficult and it's so moving and it's so powerful when someone actually changes. None of this has been in my notes. Okay. Everybody, okay, so I read a quote, and I love this quote, and it made me laugh, and you might judge me, but I'm going to say it anyway. I saw something this week that said, I can't believe it's been an entire year since I didn't lose weight or become a better person. Just doesn't seem like it's that long ago. Here's what I know about this period of the year, is that we prioritize a lot of things. We prioritize people that maybe the rest of the year we feel guilty for not prioritizing. We prioritize travel and schedule. How many of you guys spent at least double what you expected to spend this month? Amen indeed. Meanwhile, Visa and MasterCard is like, yes, Lord Jesus, thank you for December. Because we prioritize a lot of things. One thing we tend to not prioritize in this phase of the year is health. No judgment, but, and don't raise your hand. I'm going to ask a question. It's strictly rhetorical. How many of you guys hit the sweatpants this month before lunch? Here's why. This may not be a sermon. This may just be one of those weird weeks where we just hang out for a while. Here's what we have a tendency to do. In the midst of all the chaos that Jesus intended for his birthday, that's a joke. That's a joke. For you guys that ever sit through the holidays like, why do we do this? Because that's what Jesus wanted, you to be miserable. We have a method. We have a method of dealing with discomfort. It's human nature. It is just how we exist. And it's not even just people that do it. We have this word. There's one word that we will go to in a moment of not even paying attention, and that word is compensate. We're aware of the fact that we're eating too much. We're aware of the fact that we're spending too much, but we want to make sure that we still feel good. Horses do this. Do you know this? That if a horse is sore in his right front leg, say, it doesn't always show up in his right front leg. We've got horse people here. I see some people nodding. If you don't know this, let me explain to you. They will begin to compensate. And what compensation does is it relieves the pain in one area and it redistributes it or it moves it somewhere else. It doesn't solve the problem. In fact, often it charges interest. That by the time the original problem is discovered, it has caused problems somewhere else. As a form of compensation, when we know we've eaten too much, we're like, I need my sweatpants. There's a lot of guilty faces. This is not going to be a sermon about your disciplines. Relax. I just want you to understand that sometimes instead of addressing the actual problem, we will just push a button that makes us feel better for a little while. And we've all done it. And so if you're trying to think of who needs to listen to this sermon, probably you. That's a very light, almost light version of that, because we know that like the gym is going to be full next week for about a week. But that's not all. In fact, because we understand the concept, we will better understand this, is that the higher the level of discomfort, the more aggressive we become in compensation. Things like addiction, things like alcoholism, things like denial, things like emotional relationships. Do you know the reason I'm against teen dating? And all you teenagers, at me, I dare you, I'm prepared. I was a youth pastor for years. I've got tons of research on this. I'm not against two people falling in love and getting married, to be clear, for everybody who's ready to shoot me. What I am against is when relationships become a form of compensation for an actual problem, so that instead of limping in one area of life, you cover for it in another. I've known people who struggle with alcoholism, and it always goes back to a different problem. They're treating a different problem because they have found a button that deadens or softens the pain in another area. Addiction in general works this way. It's something that we do. Denial, projection. Have you ever had anybody that's like, you do this? And you're like, I feel like that's what you do, and that you're sort of projecting that. It's a compensation method. It is putting on emotional sweatpants. It's saying, I'm not going to deal with the actual problem. I just want to feel better in the moment. Isolation. People do this. I will admit that in times where I'm the most frustrated, I'm the most drawn to isolation. Sometimes, it's okay to be by yourself sometimes. It's okay to get alone time. That's not what I'm saying. But isolation is when you're just so frustrated with a problem that it shows up in just wanting to be away from everybody else. Now, here's why this matters. Here's why it's important that we understand this, is that the gospel, in its most simple, purest form, causes discomfort. To look full on into the message of the gospel will cause you to become uncomfortable. You want the gospel in a nutshell? Here it is. We couldn't afford what was owed, so the perfect Son of God came to earth and paid it for you. Now we know that, and we will even compensate by ignoring it and going, yep, got it. Because if you stop and you consider what is hidden in that statement of the message of the gospel, Jesus' whole message was, you can't do it. What if I do this? You can't do it. What if I try this? Nope. What about this? Why are we so determined to find a way around the gospel? The answer is this, is the gospel causes discomfort, and discomfort pushes us to compensate. Is everybody with me so far? That we will look for a way to address the discomfort. It's simple, but here's why the message of the gospel is so uncomfortable. The posture that is required to accept it. Let me say it again. You cannot stand up, proud of yourself, happy with your actions, look at the gospel, and stay unaffected. You either have to deny it or you've got to change your spiritual posture. That's why God says pride is such a damaging thing. It doesn't allow you to accept the message that you couldn't do it, so God had to. There are people that get uncomfortable when you buy them dinner. Like, no, I'm going to get it. No. We're talking about Jesus dying because you couldn't afford dinner. That's uncomfortable. Let me read you a story. It's one of my favorite stories. The message of the gospel leaves us realizing it exposes our dependence. Anybody love being dependent? Nope. Relying on a God that you cannot control. Sometimes it's okay if we rely on things if we feel like we can control them. We're okay with relying on something we can control or that we can manipulate. People have no problem relying on things they think they can manipulate. You rely on God and you have no control over God. Ooh, feel exposed. Deeply indebted. We love that feeling, don't we? Luke chapter 5, listen to this. It says in Luke chapter 5, verse 5, Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Remember this story? This guy, it wasn't Jesus, the Son of God. It was this guy that says, hey, why don't you try this? And Peter, who's a fisherman, is like, okay. Too tired to argue. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come help them, and they came and filled both boats so full they began to sink. Now, this story is a cool story unless you're a fisherman. If you're a fisherman, what you know is that you are dealing with magnitude that you didn't possibly comprehend in advance. Peter had fished his whole life. It was so miraculous that he was aware of what he was seeing. He became aware of who he was dealing with. And here's the most human, natural response to the discomfort of the gospel. Because logically, if you think like, whoa, you're the Son of God? How often can you do this little trick? You need to stick around. Listen to what Peter said. He said, when Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and says, go away from me. Go away from me. Why did he say that? He follows it up with, because I am a sinful man. That is the natural response to Jesus in your life. If you think that you're naturally going to hear what Jesus has done for you and be like, great, just not what we see. You have to be taught how to respond to the gospel, because the gospel will make you uncomfortable because it goes against our nature. We will all have moments of Peter like, oh, if you knew who I was, if you knew what I had done, I can't possibly earn what you are. And Jesus is going, yeah, exactly. That's the healthy response would be this. The healthy response would be this. Do you remember a couple weeks ago when I talked about Mary washing the feet of Jesus and weeping and pouring out her perfume and just like, I got nothing. I got nothing. That's actually the spiritual posture that is required to accept the gospel. That's what's necessary. And that is also why it's difficult, because we are prideful, independent, self-starter people who have to overcome our nature to even concede to Jesus that he's right and that we're wrong. You want to know the most common form of spiritual sweatpants? You'll remember because I said sweatpants so much, and it's the time of year where we love sweatpants. I will admit, I went 4 days and didn't get out of sweatpants this month. I hope that makes you feel better. Religion is the most commonly recruited form of compensation. That when we most want to reject the gospel, we will develop religion. If you've ever wondered what makes Jesus different than every other religion on earth, because the argument, I want to say that the argument makes sense, that this is our religion, that's your religion, you have your religion, I'm this, I'm that, I'm Catholic, I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm Buddhist, what's the big deal? It is this, is that God came to destroy the concept of religion, because religion is our efforts to earn or deserve. It is a form of self-justification that says, I see what you're offering, but here's what I believe that I can offer. It is how we pretend to obey while in our hearts resisting the gospel, rejecting the gospel, saying no to Jesus. Jesus, I see what you did, but have you seen what I did? The definition of justification is the action of showing something to be right or reasonable. You have got to get your head around this. You cannot present yourself to Christ as justified. You cannot make a case for yourself of being reasonable, but as people, we always try. We know this. We know what I'm saying to be true. Somewhere in your spirit, I know that there's deep down, even if we want to argue with it, deep down, you know we are all guilty of trying to earn something that we have difficulty accepting as free. I would rather pay for my own dinner than have someone else buy me dinner. And the reason for that is I'm claustrophobic. I don't want to feel like I owe anybody anything. I'm not defending it as right. I'm just saying, so when God says, I had to do it because you couldn't, my natural instinct is, well, then what can I do to get closer to earning it? How can I get closer to deserving it? Religion is how we compensate for the gospel. John chapter 12. I'm going to read this story again. We just read it, but I'm going to read it again because there was a third character. Remember, there was Simon, and he thought he was good. There was Mary, and she knew she was bad, but there was a third party. It says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. This is a story we've already heard. They're at Simon's house. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard and expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Can I make a point just real quick, separate from the sermon? When you get it right in your heart, the role that Jesus plays and the roles that you play, it is like a fragrance to those around you. I think that's a specific reference. Have you ever known anybody who changed, who was one way and they became a different way, and the way that affects people who watch that story? I think there's a very specific reason that is how this story played out, is that Jesus is demonstrating when you get it right, it positively affects those around you. But that's not the focus. Here's what she was saying. I give up all claims to self-justification. I know that I need justified. I know that I can't. I am giving up my claim I am pouring out anything of value that I have. Listen, I am giving up anything that I claim as valuable because I cannot justify myself. It's a great thought. It's a great point. But when someone is determined to justify themselves, like we all have been at some point in our lives, it is offensive to watch someone who seemingly is owed nothing receive forgiveness. Have you ever seen somebody get something that you wanted, that you thought you deserved? Does it just make you feel warm and fuzzy inside? How many times? I do all this. I go to church. I pay my tithe. I even forgave that one person for doing that one thing. I do all this work around here. I'm the most busiest person in the whole place, and they're getting What you're saying is, in my attempts to be self-justified, it frustrates me when someone else gets justified for free. We're offended by the gospel when we're trying to reject the gospel. The gospel is offensive when it's played out in front of us. If we're making an attempt to self-justify. When you say things like, I do the most around here, I'm the most busy, I'm part of everything, what you're saying is, look what I deserve in return. Mary was saying, because of the gospel, take everything. But there was someone watching who said, I do everything to gain everything. I do so that I can get. She says, because I've gotten, I do. This is an important order of words. She says, because of what you did, I respond. Verse 4. But one of the disciples, and wouldn't you know it's Judas? Wouldn't you know? I've never heard a sermon defending Judas. I'm not going to. It was something I've noticed. He's like the boo hiss character of every movie. He says this: why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? Are you going to come at him for that? His pretend religion. Isn't that what religion does? Look what I do for these poor people. You getting this on camera? Cool. Look at this poor person, all that I'm doing. Get out of the shot. Look what I'm doing for these poor people. It's religion we do so that we can get. And Judas is saying, she stole from me. Judas was mad because she was taking from him an opportunity. Because that's what religion does. When we compensate, it doesn't solve the original problem. Remember, it just moves it somewhere else and charges interest. What we're seeing is the results of an injury that had taken place in Judas's theology that is now showing up. And if we don't understand how it works, we're going to go, what is wrong with him? You are so much meaner to people when you don't understand their pain. It was worth a year's wages. But listen to this, verse 6. He did not say this because he cared about the poor. Well, duh. Well, duh. But because he was a thief. So I want to point something out. Judas was a thief. He was stealing money. Now think of this. He was stealing money from Jesus. Jesus, who was going to die for his sins, he was stealing from him. And yet, Jesus put Judas, of all the people he could have chosen, he put Judas in charge of the money. Is there a more demonstrative way to disrespect money than Jesus putting Judas, the thief, in charge of the money? It's almost like Jesus gave himself the giggles. Like, money? Judas, why don't you watch the money? Jesus showed no respect for the finances. None. In so much as that he put Judas, and Judas was like, well, here's what's crazy. Here's what's crazy. He says, I do a lot around here. When you start down the slippery slope of self-justification, I do, so I deserve, I'm going to earn it. The gospel is that we were way over there further than you can imagine, and that God was way over there further than you can imagine, and he went from there to where you are. That's the gospel. Religion says, well, we're not that bad. And if we weren't that bad, then God didn't have to come that far. Religion is the thing that takes the stitching out of the gospel. And when you start down the road of religious expression, what you are doing is you are starting the dangerous practice of self-justification. You have your own bag of justification, and anytime you need it, you go and you pick out of it and say, this is how I justify my behavior. You have started a dangerous habit of saying, I don't need God as much as everyone else because this is the things that I do to deserve it. To the point that Judas had even begun to justify stealing money from Jesus. And so when someone else comes in and demonstrates a love that is the natural response, by the way, to the gospel, Judas was upset by it and went, she doesn't deserve that. I do. This is a sister story. This is a sister story to another parable that Jesus told, and I actually wonder this. I wonder if Jesus told this story with Judas in mind, because let's not forget. It says that at the Last Supper, Lacey pointed this out, and it's a great point. At the Last Supper, Jesus said, someone's going to betray me. You would think that the other 11 disciples would have been like, we all know it's Judas. They didn't know. So that means that Jesus was allowing Judas to steal from him and was protecting him and covering for him like a dad who desperately wanted to believe that someday his son would come back around. Even when we get it wrong, it's like Jesus was saying, I'm trying. I know where you're at, but I want you to know that it's not going to be because of me. If you don't come back, it won't be because of lack of my own effort. One of you is going to betray me, and they didn't know. So Jesus tells this story. He tells the story of a prodigal son, and I love Jesus because I've said it before. There's a word we're going to hear a lot around here, and that word is gritty. And the reason we're going to say the word gritty is because I'm sick of churches not being gritty. Because Jesus was, and sinners are, so why would we not be? Why would we be clean and proper? Do you know me at all? I'm a lot of things. I'm not proper. Honestly, I'm way closer to trashy, but Jesus, when he tells this story of the prodigal son, he's like, you guys, let me tell you a story about this guy. And he proceeds to mention every offensive thing you can imagine about this kid. Everything that went against society, everything that went against social standards, he said to his dad, you guys, he said to his dad, Dad, I wish you were dead. You're no good to me. You're of no value. And the father, instead of kicking him out, gave him half of his belongings. And so you can imagine people were just offended by this. And he goes, and then do you know what he did? He partied and he hung out with prostitutes. And the people listening to the story were like, oh, yeah, and that's not all. Guess what? He's in a faraway land where they don't think pigs are disgusting because remember, pigs were disgusting. Jesus specifically brings out the pig story about the prodigal son. And he goes, he wasn't just feeding the pigs and interacting with pigs. He was less than the pigs. And he's saying this on purpose. Why? Because Jesus wasn't afraid of gritty details. But then it says when he returned, the father demonstrated a feminine behavior which would have lessened his own pride, and he ran to his son, and he redeemed him, and he threw him a party. You guys have heard this story. But I don't think, in what I've learned and what I've been taught, I don't believe that the story was about the prodigal son primarily. It was about the father. It was a story about the father, and let me prove it to you. It says in verse 25, they're throwing a party for the youngest son who was gone, and he comes back. He said, Dad, I wish you were dead. And he squandered his belongings because Jesus is, again, like, can we get over this idea that I don't have more money? Like, this scarcity thing that we're doing is killing all of us. This scarcity of, like, you spent half your father's belongings, it can never be regained. And Jesus is like, I'm letting Judas hold the money back. But the oldest son, we've always thought of him as being the good son. Verse 25, it says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants to ask him what was going on. Because now, think of this. If the younger son took half the belongings that belonged to him that were rightfully his and squandered it, then who owns everything else? Wrong. The father still. See how we do that? We're like, well, the older son. Nope. The father still owns it all. It says, your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. They didn't have freezers. Killing the fattened calf was not a casual thing. It was like, that's expensive. And don't you know that the older brother demonstrates this? He killed my calf. That belongs to me now. The older brother became angry and he refused to go in because, remember, religion leads to a lot of things, including isolation. We don't want to be happy for people who have been given something for free when we feel like we've earned something because religion is disgusting. But he would not go in. So remember, the father ran to the youngest son, and now he goes out to the oldest son. This is a good dad who is willing to ignore all social cues on behalf of his kids. He's telling this story, and I have to believe he is telling this story with Judas in mind. Extending to him an offer that he had to have known Judas was going to reject, but he extended it anyway. He says, but he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, cleaning the church, being there early, cooking in the kitchen. Are these bad things, by the way? Was the fact that he was working, was that a negative thing? No, that's a good thing. But the problem was the reason, the heart behind. See, I've heard it said this way. Timothy Keller said this, and I love it. He said the youngest son came home and had to apologize for why he had done wrong. The oldest son needed to apologize for why he had done right. Judas needed to apologize for why he had done right. The danger was he had already started justifying himself. Listen to this, because the older son, he's going to make sure to remind the dad. He's not like, hey, Dad, I don't know if you know this or not. Can I tell you what's been going on? Because I've been keeping tabs. Yeah, you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, doesn't this kind of sound like an argument between a mom and a dad when a kid's acting like a knucklehead? Your kid, the son of yours, who has squandered your property because, Dad, I want you to know I am concerned for you. I'm all about you, Dad, as his dad is literally throwing a party and excited and happy because his son's returned. He's like, Dad, I want you to know I'm concerned about your happiness. And the dad's like, well then, Join us. No. I don't care about your happiness. I care about my finances. I got to get through this sermon. We're running out of time. This son of yours who squandered your property with prostitutes. Do you know this? Comes home and he says this, my son, father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. He's saying you are seeing the gospel played out. You are seeing the gospel that at my expense, I extend grace and mercy and love to people who don't deserve it, even when they think they're good, especially when they think they're good. It's easy to forgive someone who is bad and admits it, but man, it is difficult when someone who thinks they are good to admit that their religion is just compensation for rebellion to the gospel. It is rebellion that says you did it for me for free. I don't accept it. I think this was told because Judas was the older son. It was easy to see. You know that when you compensate for the gospel, it'll leave you feeling, and I wrote it down because it is interesting the way that it was written out. It leads to feeling underappreciated. If you ever feel underappreciated, that's religion going, psst, come here. Look at all that you do. Underappreciated, overworked, overlooked, unloved. These are all symptoms. These are all symptoms that said, I do so that I could get. And even though I do, I'm not getting. I want control. I want access. I want in the inner circle. I want privilege. I want. And I think I deserve it because of what I do. And if you don't get as much as you feel like that you've done, it leaves you unhappy. We've done, therefore we deserve. We're people who are wired for reward systems. It's just how we work. We do, and it's like you can teach a lab rat how to do something if the reward system is accurate. So what God says is this, if you're getting it right, if you are accepting through the correct spiritual posture that says, I can't do it, so you're going to have to. The result of a proper spiritual posture is this, love, joy, joy. Shouldn't churches be the most joyous place on earth? Shouldn't we be the kindest, most loving if we're getting it right? Joy. Listen, if my brother said something to me last month, and I thought it was profound. He said, the two things I've been praying for is wisdom and joy. I'm like, dude, you don't understand what you're asking for because people who have wisdom almost never have an abundance of joy. The Bible even says that sorrow is almost always attached to wisdom. I admire him for being willing to go that I want both because of the balance that comes with wisdom and joy. There's got to be a sermon series in the Bible somewhere about the joy that we are lacking because of religion, because religion has stolen it away from us. Peace. Peace. If you're constantly in fights, if you're constantly in turmoil, if you're constantly in chaos, if you're constantly getting called into meetings at work, that's not peace. Patience. I know it's there. I'm going to ignore it. Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So if you say you're a fisherman, and I go, well, then where are your fish? This should be the fish. This should be like, hey, I grasp the gospel because look at the things that are showing up in my life. But the only thing that we want in religion, the only end goal, whether we realize it or not, the end goal of religion is independence from God. Think of this. I'll do it myself. I want to be independent from God. God says that he provides all of those things. So what we are doing is we are signing up for a bottomless pit that we can never fill up. That means the nature of religion is that it's never enough. How could it be? How could God allow us to be completely fulfilled apart from him? God sees to it that we're not fulfilled apart from him so that it creates a desire. It triggers the reward system that says, I got to get more of God, not through what I earn or what I've deserved, but in response to the goodness that he's already given me. We find the reward system for religion in money. How much money is enough money? It's a million, billion, trillion, gazillion dollar question, isn't it? Have you ever known anybody who got so rich, they're like, whew, I'm good, apart from God? That's enough zeros. I'll never spend that. It seems like it's the richest people who want more. What about approval? Do you guys see that? I do all this and nobody appreciates me. What we're asking for is approval. What we're asking for is that somehow we can replace what God gives, because what we're striving for in religion is independence from the God who gives us the things that we so desperately need. We don't even see that we're compensating. We become this wretched, selfish, fearful, approval-seeking, attention-seeking, insecure creature that is hard on other people, that we can look at a prostitute who is just pouring her soul out to Jesus and go, she shouldn't have done that. Religion makes us gross because it's based in comparison. Am I doing good enough? Am I doing better? The only way that we can know if we're doing better is to compare against other people. Or we're doing better than them. Well, they didn't even show up last week. Well, they haven't been here in a month. And it takes our focus off of the gospel, which is to say, hey, you don't earn it. You can't. I want to read you a verse. We got to be done. Matthew 11:28 says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Rest. It doesn't say, I will give you a list of chores, a list of requirements. You want in? Hey, you know what? We could build 18 new buildings if I told everybody, if I could convince everybody that for $10,000, you're guaranteed to get into heaven. They would line up around the corner, like 10,000? I'll steal, I'll rob. I don't care. 10,000? I'm in. You would think that if this was a religion, we would need to attach it to manipulation and fear. Well, if you don't, what about Judgment Day when God asked if you helped build a building? We've all been in services like that. God says, no. I'm the requirement, and I paid it. It's my belief this. It's my belief that if we got a hold of who God was, we would by nature do more than fear or manipulation could ever hope to accomplish. We would naturally go, what can we, you did what? What can I do? In response to that, what do you need from me? And then we can be happy, we can be joyful, we can be loving, and when somebody else makes a mistake, we can go, you're me. I'm just like that. I used to do that, or I've done that, or you're me. Make yourself at home. Eat something. Let me cook you something. Are you kidding me? Look at what God did for me. If he can do it for me, he can do it for you. Doesn't that sound more like Jesus than, well, if you really want to know, like, I had a friend, I'm not going to say names. Actually, I want to finish this verse. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Not rest for your bodies, because a lot of us, we don't need any more of that. He says, rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I had a guy call me today, and he says, hey, I'm watching a televangelist. I'm not going to say names. And he said that if we send him, I can just sense the sarcasm through the text. He says, if we send him X amount, we get a plaque. And I asked Lacey, I said, do people who feel like they need plaques even have $2,500? Apparently they do. We can get so weird and broken and twisted in our religion that I'm like, if you do, I'll do. If you give me this, I'll give you that. If you do this, then you won't have to experience that. If you give to me, if you give to the church, if you give me. And we can just become this weird thing that says the gospel, we don't have time for that. We're busy earning. We're busy deserving. We're busy. We're just busy. What are you doing? Busy things. I feel like if God catches us sitting down, he's going to be mad at us. Anybody else have a mom that would come in and go, what are you guys doing? And you're like, cleaning. Vacuuming. Because you knew if you said the words bored, mow the yard. Mom, it's December. Mow the yard. Get out of the house. And I think sometimes we feel like that God's looking at us going, what are you doing? We're like, Jesus and stuff. It's a compensation that leads to becoming Judas, where we self-justify. We go to our bag and we justify this and we justify that. Well, if you were in my position, you'd have done the same thing. Well, if you had to go through what I did, you'd have done the same thing. Well, I'm only doing this because it would become this weird, gross version of something that Jesus never intended. Let's pray. God, give us a heart that gives and does and acts in proper response to a God who saved our lives. God, Take it all. Take everything. God, separate us from the things that cause us to feel secure. God, take away our reward system that's based in more or deserving or earning or rewarding. God, break whatever that is in us that would bypass the gospel to pick up religion. God, let us just look full into the face of the gospel and realize what that means for us. You did all of it. It's like the worst business plan ever that we don't have to do to deserve, that we just accept. Like that's the posture of the gospel, is that we just accept it. But that God, that will trigger more in us. We will actually do more in love than we would have ever done in fear or manipulation, and we'll actually be happier in the process. We'll be more fulfilled in the process. We're giving in response to the love that we couldn't have earned. For those of us here today, God, who need to accept, your word says if we confess with our mouths and believe in our hearts that you did what the gospel tells us that you did, we'll be saved. Give us that heart. If you could look up for just a second. You want to know what the do part was? When Jesus said, do what? Do what? He said two things. Do this. Be baptized. Now, the thief on the cross went to heaven and didn't get baptized. So it doesn't say, now if you do this, then you'll be good. He says, just do this. He goes, okay, so what is it? What is the do? Die. Just die. And then come back up new. The baptism is this demonstration of like, what's the posture? The posture is not stand and fight. It's lay down and surrender. He said, one more thing. Don't forget the cross and what was done on your behalf, because without the blood and without the sacrifice and without the breaking of my body, there is no gospel. Don't forget the gospel, because when you forget the gospel, religion will take its place. Lord, send us home with that. As we go into worship, God, help us to understand, help explain it to us in a way that our spirits can comprehend, that we can live as though it's already been done. Not so that it can be done. God, it's already been done. Give us a heart that's grateful, like people who were rescued instead of people who deserve. In Jesus' name, amen.